Oh, I see the record light came on.
You're on.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Regents PCS online training module for verification. This is for the end of 2019-20 and the up-and-coming year 2021. I'm Gregory Phourde from Gregory Jon Consulting, and it's nice to have you. So information that needs to be verified in what is acceptable verification is items that are required by the Department of Ed. And you will find that verification selections aren't necessarily the same across the board. In 2019 and 20, the FAFSA items that may require verification and the verification tracking groups are the same for those of 18 and 19. As in prior years, the department will use the database statistical analyst for selecting verification applicants. So it's very simple. You might have the same students in the same group and a various number gets selected. And if you wonder why your verification rate is greater than 30-some%, it's because it depends on the number of applicants that hit the CPS. And if it's a busy day, you might get a lesser amount. If it's a not so busy day, you'll get a higher amount. And remember, this is all done on statistical probability of information provided by the students, which they feel may not be accurate. And the ISAR itself will indicate the verification tracking group, whether it's V1 or V4 or V5. So for V1 verification, that is called standard verification. You understand that the FAFSA to pay on an ISAR, when you get the information that gets centered in from the FAFSA, what they're looking at is the adjusted gross income for tax filers, their income tax paid, portions of their IRA, untaxed portions of pensions, and of course the other items that are down there, tax exempt interest and educational tax credits. For non-filers, you're going to have to get a statement from them for income earned from work. And for tax filers and non-tax filers, they're going to be verifying the number of household members and the number in college. And of course, verification V4 is what is called the custom verification group. And that requires that you can document high school completion status, regardless of whether or not you have asked for it as part of your admissions requirements. You are required to confirm the high school completion. And you're also required to have the student fill out an identity statement of education purpose. The V5 group is what is called the aggregate, and that requires an additional information. So as you can see, you're going to have to verify the information from V1, which is all of the tax documents listed there. And of course, not income from work for non-tax filers, and of course, household size, number in college, high school completion status, and the identity and statement of education. Individuals are still required to obtain a non-filing verification form from the IRS, specifically for this group as well. An institution may not delay in completing verification for an applicant when a tax filing extension has been granted. You have to have a copy of that. So if you have a student who has requested an extension to file their taxes, the income tax and verification regulatory requirements are met if the filer who has been granted the extension provides the institution with acceptable documentation consistent with the verification documents published in the free application or federal student aid information, which means you need the tax form. Now, you're going to need a copy of the IRS 4868 and forms of W-2 employment to prove that they filed an extension. And this provides an extension filers with a timely alternative to complete the verification process and avoid delays. And of course, if for individuals who are called to active duty during a war point or military operation or national emergency, in lieu of the 4868, institutions can accept a signed statement stating they were unable to file the verification. So the items that need to be verified. For 2020, 2021, okay, the tracking groups are the same as for 1920. And of course, with COVID-19, some of the 1920 rules are relaxed on getting some of the information completed. You have some extensions. It is not permissible to provide the same relaxation for 2021. And when you read the statement for the CARES Act, it is very specific. It says 2021 verification requirements are not subject to the same relaxation of rules on collecting the in-person documentation. So If a parent or someone tells you, oh, I can't get that information to you, your answer is, well, that's okay, we can do it at a later date, but your funds will not be dispersed until that's completed. So what is acceptable documentation? Well, effective with the beginning of the publication of January 9, 2019 on the electronic announcement, and it's applicable to the 1819 processing and the verification cycles beyond that. The department announced that an institution may accept as acceptable documentation a signed copy of the income tax return for the applicable year, and that the tax filer submitted to the IRS or other authorities to verify the information on the FAFSA and the ISAR. This includes a signed copy of an income tax return to complete verification for amended filers, and the Federal Register notice on that was published on May 24th, 2019, reflects this guidance. The following charts are available in lists for 2018 for the 1040. Okay? So when you look for the documentation, adjusted gross income for 18 was line 7. Income tax paid was 13. Untaxed portion is 4A and B. The IRS deductions in Schedule A, and income tax on line 2A, and education credits on IRS Schedule 3. Alternative documentation accepted for non-filing students. For individuals that are required to obtain verification of a non-filing status or other information from the IRS, individuals who are unable to obtain verification of non-filing from the IRS or other relevant tax authority, and based upon the institution's determination, that means your professional judgment type of determination, that you have no reason to question the student or family's good faith effort to obtain the required document, you may accept a signed statement certifying that the individual attempted to obtain the verification of non-filing from the IRS and was unable to. Okay, so let me give you a little piece of advice. If you are using this method where you're going to say you're going to accept the student's word, it would be in your best interest, AKA the department will audit you and tell you you're wrong if you do not have a copy of the request sent to the IRS. So if you are going to take their word for it and you're unable to receive it, you need to have an IRS documentation that shows that you have had the student apply to receive the form. If the form is not provided, then they sign a statement. And if you also get one back that says they have no record that they filed one, you can then use a written notification from the student. I suggest you create a non-tax filer form where they can list their income on there. For IRS extension filers, the signed statements must also indicate that the individual has not filed a 2018 return and list all sources of income. For the 2020-21 award year for information, a dependent student who is a non-filer is excluded from the requirements to provide verification of the dependent student's non-filing status. Persons from a U.S. territory or Commonwealth or foreign country who are not required to file a return can provide a signed statement. So let's go back here real quick for this dependent situation. So if you have a dependent student who's a non-tax filer who's 19 years old and never filed taxes, the department is not going to penalize you. Okay, so documentation requirements for IRS extension filers. For an individual who is required to file an IRS 2018 tax return and has been granted a filing extension, if it's this point, okay, now we're at that period where, you know, tax filing statuses are going to be an issue that might be affecting us for 2021. For some students specifically, that the IRS is not accepting some of the requests. But going forward, the current year of 2019, I see that there's going to be some rules relaxed a little bit on collecting the documents because people have until July of this year, 2020, to file a 19 return. So if you have an extension, a copy of their approval of the extension is the requirement. And if a student goes beyond 6 months, you're going to need the Form 2350 in order to provide that information. And you also need to have a non-filing form dated on or before October 1st of 2019, which means the IRS approved it. And if a student is self-employed, a signed statement certifying the amount of the AGI, their adjusted gross income, and the taxes paid for the year is going to need to be provided. That's a little bit complicated if the student filed an extension. However, if the student has filed an extension, there should be some sort of paperwork together where you can come up with those figures. Now, the IRS data retrieval tool, the DRT, Okay, the function is available again for 2021. All DRT data continues to be encrypted. FAFSA applicants cannot make corrections to their information that comes out on the ISAR to the FAFSA itself. They can only go in and make corrections on the fields that are allowed. Only institutions now will be able to make corrections to specific information. So for example, if a student's address is changed or they have to put in their high school information, they can go in and use their documentation, but the DRT's function is going to restrict the access to income information. Okay, so the DRT is also mobile ready. So if they use their phone, if the DRT transfers a non-zero amount into the untaxed portion, the applicant will be able to report that amount of a rollover at the CPS and they'll subtract it. So there's a few things there for some people who have some interesting items, but I will tell you, having the restrictions on the data retrieval tool and shielding that information from students to be able to see it makes this a much more controlled environment for financial aid. If you have an amended tax return, the IRS request flag will be a 07, and you'll need to obtain a signed copy of the 1040X or documentation that includes the changes made to the original tax return. Federal verification for 2021, as we know, requires 2018. So if they're filing an amended tax return after the filing period, you're going to need to prove that you have a copy of that. On the verification worksheets for 2021, the same rules apply. You have to include yourself as the student has to be on there. Include the parents. If the parents are divorced, it lists the parent to whom they live with most during 12 months. What's interesting is I have a student in one of the schools that I work with that has listed their mother as their primary responsible parent for information, and the father is the address where the student lists and resides at. And what I found out is that the student is the dependent of the father, but the father was not responsible in getting material or content, so the student changed their mailing address and other things to the mother. So if you have situations like that, you probably want to get a statement which helps you clarify which parent was used and which one was the domicile parent. If they do not live with one parent more than the other, they would indicate the parent who provides more than half their support. If the parent is remarried, they must include the step parent, which means they include the step parent's income on the FAFSA that's being completed, and you may have to make corrections if it was excluded. And if the parents are unmarried but live together, you would have to list parent 1 and parent 2 for situations where parents who are living together and meet the common law requirements. So you need to know your state's requirements. Include your parents' other children. If your parent provides support to more than half their support between July of 2020 and June of 2021 next year, or if the children would be required to provide parental information completed. So you need to know if the people live in the household. Now, we've had individuals list 9 and 10 children that are all parts of grown adult children who have their other children living in the household. And they list them as other dependents. But then when you find out that all these other grown adult children are only living there for housing purposes and not being supported, you have to exclude that. So if you have some information you think is conflicting, you'll need to ask that question, because it is possible to list individuals who live in your house that are not really dependents on you, so therefore they're not part of the household, should not be included in the income evaluation. The department suggests that each page of an institutionally developed verification document include their appropriate heading. Well, the department gives you a base to work with, and you can use that and create it, and you can make your own fillable PDFs. But remember, if you do an institution document, you must have a wet signature. And you should ensure that you collect the student's name, their ID number, and other identifying information, and each page is identified as belonging to the student. So I suggest at the top of the page, you put a little header line where if you're going to give them a fillable form, that you've embedded the student's ID that is associated with your system. So if you have like a banner system that has a code automatically assigned to the student, that code should be up there. If you don't have a system that assigns a code, or you do not use the assigned code, you should probably list the last name and the last 4 digits of the Social Security number, which protects it from being PII, which is personal identifiable information. The last 4 digits are allowed to be used. The department also recommends that you advise students to write their name on the tax information prior to submitting it. look, if you get a tax form from the person that's an actual form that's not signed, please get in the habit of getting the document signed. A tax transcript from the IRS delivered to you does not require a signature from the student. Conflicting information. All right, so this is the big one. This is where the department really gets concerned that institutions are not going through the proper process of determining what's going on. And Regulation 668-16 subpart F says you are required to resolve it. And I'll tell you, from multiple program reviews, the department is pretty heavy-handed on institutions that don't address conflicting information properly. And until it has been resolved, you're not supposed to disperse aid. And if they determine that you have conflicting information, they can make you reconstruct the file and return all the funds. So it's a good idea that you take a plan of action, that if you see something that doesn't look right, that you take the proper steps to make it look right. Discrepancies in information that are used to calculate EFC or determine eligibility are what they're looking for. Now, again, would be those multiple household size or people with zero income who will claim multiple dependents on a zero income. Examples that must be resolved are ones that we see commonly is called married couples filing separately, but because they're filing head of household. So they're not filing married filing separately. They're filing a separate return, and each of them is filing as a head of household. Now, you'll find that a lot of tax preparers tell them if they do that, they get a greater amount of refund, but it's actually an illegal act, which means that you now have to resolve that. The department says that if you are married and filing a separate return, but you are not married filing head of household. Please read the IRS documentation on that, because you need to know what a student's requirements are. The IRS allows spouses who have lived apart for at least 6 months of the calendar year, not including separation, okay, where they can be filing head of household, but they have to have documentation of that. And if net assets is zero and a tax return shows income or assets, that's going to be a situation where that would be conflicting information. So here's a little quick chart to help you along with that. Conflicting information versus verification. Okay, for all students, you have to resolve conflicting information. On verification, you only are required to resolve those selected by CPS or ones that you have designated as the school selecting them for verification. Under conflicting information, the items to review is any information provided on the FAFSA that you find is conflicting. And for verification, it's the only item specified annually in the register. How do you resolve it? Well, in both cases, you're required to collect documentation, recalculate the EFC, submit corrections to CPS, and identify that to the student as appropriate. There is no tolerance for conflicting information. The department takes no mercy on that. Verification and tolerance is $25 per single dollar item related. It's a good idea just to recalculate it and make sure you show it. If you don't know how to hand calc, you can always send it in. And for dispersing aid, you cannot disperse aid with conflicting information at all, period. You can make interim disbursements under the verification rules. Please check that in your handbook. So here's a little conflicting information quiz. A household size, true or false, reports the information on the FAFSA that differs from the number on the tax exempt. Is that considered conflicting information? Well, that is true. And if you get documentation of that, confirm what the actual household size is, it is possible to have different items reported on the tax document and on the household size. Unsolicited tax documents received by the financial aid office may be returned to the sender or destroyed. Yes, that is also would be conflicting information if you kept a tax document that wasn't required. So you should return all unsolicited documents to the student. If they bring them in, fantastic. They can use them to fill the form out. Do not hold them. Do not keep them. Do not go past go. Do not put them in a drawer. Give them back to the student. Any and all subsequent ISARs received for a student must be reviewed, even if verification was completed on the previous ISAR and all aid is dispersed. Absolutely. If you get an updated ISAR from NSLDS because the student defaulted, you need to know. If you get an ISAR that you dispersed and you get a new one and it says there's information showing that the student has conflicting Pell paid at multiple schools, you have to go through that. So you must go and look at an ISAR that came in. Conflicting information must be resolved before a school can perform professional judgment. Oh, absolutely, that's true, because just like verification, you cannot make a professional judgment on information that isn't accurate. And now this one is an interesting one. If the admissions office has entered a date of birth in the system that is different from what was reported on the FAFSA, must this conflict be resolved? Well, if the date of birth is part of what goes through to check Social Security and name and match and all that, the answer is true. It must be resolved. Now, if this is the situation where you have Fat Finger Freddy typed in a number that's wrong and they typed a 9 instead of an 8 on the date of birth period, I would suggest that you get a copy of the driver's license or other documentation that has the date of birth and put it in there to show that you made the correction. And can you make an interim disbursement if you've not completed verification, even if there's conflicting information that needs to be resolved? No, you are not able to make an interim disbursement if there's conflicting information ever. Collecting information, okay? In addition to, conflicting information. This is the end of all this. And this is one of those topics that the department kind of pokes and prods along. So in addition to reviewing application and the data match provided by the CPS, the school must have an adequate internal system for identifying it. So regardless of the source and regardless of whether the student is selected for verification, conflicting information always must be resolved, such as information from the admissions office as to whether the student has a high school diploma or information from other offices regarding academic progress and enrollment status. The school is also responsible for reconciling any conflicting information that it has with one exception: if the student dies. If the student dies, then there's no way to collect the information. I want to go back on the previous one that has academic progress and enrollment status. I've had institutions where they've had satisfactory academic progress for academic purposes and satisfactory academic progress for financial aid purposes, and found that it calculates the information differently, which poses conflicting information there. So that is possible. It does occur, and if you are fortunate enough to only treat it one way, you'll be fine. Now, in a clock hour school that does not report all of the students' grades for periods for which they fail to take their tests or quizzes, and you artificially inflate their GPA because you let them only have counted grades they took, because the student was missing classes and didn't take tests or quizzes, you could be subject to the department interpreting that as conflicting information for an artificial grade inflation that you failed to put the student on financial aid warning due to SAP. So please review your policies when it comes to grades and absences. If your school has conflicting information concerning a student's eligibility, or you have any reason to believe that a student's application is incorrect, you must resolve it before you disperse aid. The department takes no liberties there with you. You either did or didn't do it. If you didn't do it, be prepared to reconstruct your records. And of course, if you discover discrepancies after dispersing financial aid funds, you must still reconcile the conflicting information. So that can occur if a student is in a credit hour program and you pay them for full time and they never attempted the course and they're now really only 3/4 time and you have to recalculate Pell. Well, the number of credits in that situation would be conflicting with what you're required to do. Thank you all for joining us today for the verification scenario. I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Ta-da!
Ta-da! Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you very much.
So we're all done. Can you believe it?
I believe it. You know,
I'm going to miss these chats, you know?
Yeah, me too. Well, next year, what we're going to do is film you the whole time when you're having a meeting. I just put up the 2021 meetings for next year. And hopefully, we'll have some meetings.
I would hope so.
Yeah, me too. Kind of miss them.
Where is my Control 8? Here we go.
Well, I'll end the
expand.
There you go. Well, I'll end the meeting and you can go back and have your meeting. You're coming up in a minute, right, Ned?
Yeah. Actually, no, I'm going to call my mom. Yesterday was my meeting. That's why I couldn't do it.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, go ahead and tell your mom I said hello, and this worked out really good. Thanks.
And I actually thought we had 2 sessions that were required to be done today. You know what I mean? But when I reviewed everything with you and reviewed the PCCS stuff, it appears we've touched everything. Because when I went into my, I'm pulling up my folder here. So when I went into my training content folder and I sorted everything, there are 7 besides this one. Because I had Title IV, Satisfactory Progress, NSLDS, financial aid, FAFSA compliance, and academic activity. And 2 of those you did before. So yeah, we did them all. I'm surprised. I thought we didn't do them all.
Yeah, I'm happy, but like I said, next year it'll be a lot easier because then you can, use your hands and arms and you get a little contact with people and stuff like that. We'll just film everything.
Did you notice the beard's been getting longer every time we've been doing it?
But Buddy grew in a full beard. He looks like Santa Claus.
Well, when I came back on March, I had shaved everything off. It was just a regular chin strap stubble. And I told Mary, since I'm in quarantine, I'm not going to shave it. I'll just keep it trimmed. So I'm down probably about that much now from my chin. Wow. So hey, I eat healthy.
ZZ Top.
All righty, my friend. I'll talk to you later.
I'll talk to you later. See you later, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm going to end it right now.